Now, Conference, it's really hard to follow Glynis in that fantastic speech, but I want to start with some good news. I'm going to make a shorter speech than I did last year. That's not meant to be that's not meant to be the most popular thing I say. And then we're going to hear from Ivan and Douglas, and then about 2 hours after I finish, it'll be Ed Balls, and I like that. There's kind of strange synergy about it, because that's roughly about how far after me he was in this year's London Marathon. Anyway, I don't want to, in one short speech, ruin the entire defence budget of the Labour government, so I'll maybe get on with my speech. Look, quite rightly and understandably, there's been a huge focus this year on Syria. But I want to start by paying tribute to a group of men and women who are now involved in the 12th and penultimate year of a bloody conflict. Because Afghanistan cannot become a forgotten war. Too many people have been lost, and too much is at stake for that to happen. And in a country in a conflict with no purely military solution, the progress that is being made is down in large part to the 6,000 members of the British Armed Forces who are serving there today. And our party and our country should always hold them in our thoughts and pay tribute to their service and their sacrifice. Now, they serve with bravery. They're spurred by their patriotism, but they're separated from their families. And the families themselves are filled with pride, but of course stalked by the constant fear of the danger that their families and loved ones face in Afghanistan. And it's because of our forces and because of their families here at home that the Shadow Defence Team and the entire Labour Party are determined that we are the party of the armed forces. Now, that's a tough challenge for any political party, and it's rightly a tough challenge for all political parties. Because in this issue, more than anything else, you can't just declare your intention. You've got to demonstrate it as a truth. So while we are out of power at Westminster, we're not totally out of influence. And I want to use what the residual influence we have around the country in local authorities and elsewhere to demonstrate that we are the party of the armed forces. And I'm proud of the progress that we've made so far. A commitment to change the NHS constitution to enshrine the principles of the military covenant so that those who have suffered severe life-changing physical wounds or the invisible injury of mental health are properly supported. Our Veterans Interview Programme, giving life chances and job opportunities to service leavers. Our Veterans Champions, helping veterans settle back in to communities, and our plan to name streets after the fallen, to provide a perpetual memory to those who haven't returned. All of those sorts of things are about being party of the armed forces. But there's something else. Today, too many of our armed forces face disadvantage and discrimination, as do some of our veterans. And it's sad to think that those who fight for our country might need the additional protection of our laws, but some do. And that's why I want to tell Conference today that next month in the House of Commons, Labour will table amendments to the Defence Reform Bill so that for the first time ever, it is a specific criminal offence to attack a member of the British Armed Forces, and at last they will have the protection that their bravery deserves. So I want and we want our forces to feel at ease in our country and at home in our party. That's why we're the first party and only party to enshrine the military covenant in our rulebook. Why we were first to set up a new scheme of military membership for our forces. You know, some people said that couldn't work and others said it shouldn't work. But I'm so proud that over 800 members, new military members, have joined the Labour Party. Each of them is welcome. Each of them strengthens our party, and we want many more just like them to be part of our political family. Now, I want to say a word or two about the other parties. When the government get it right, we should support them, as we did when they rightly but reluctantly enshrined the military covenant in law. Now, the truth is, they've written this down, but they don't fully understand it, because just look at their legacy. Forces housing has been neglected. Forces allowances have been cut, and there's been sackings of specialists who serve on the front line. When it came to the big vote on Syria, two government ministers locked themselves away in a soundproof cupboard and missed the vote. Is it any wonder this is a government that doesn't listen? These are the people that gave us aircraft carrier without an aircraft, and they're at it again. They're at it again. They've sacked 20,000 soldiers to be replaced by reservists. They've now had to deploy soldiers to rescue the private sector contract that was meant to find the reservists to replace the soldiers that the country didn't want to lose in the first place. I mean, it's a shambles. And they've got the audacity to talk about hard-working people. Well, how much more hard-working can you get than a young man defusing an explosive in the 50-degree heat of Helmand? Or a young woman medic holding in her hands the life of her bloodied comrade while she herself has been subjected to incoming fire? And then ask yourself, how can it be right? How can it possibly be justified that under this government, the pay of every private in the British Army is cut by £3,000, and yet 13,000 millionaires get a tax cut of £100,000 each? Now, we know times are tough. We know times are tough. But Mr. Cameron, there is something fundamentally wrong about your out-of-touch government that's willing to cut the pay of those who serve in Afghanistan to fund a tax giveaway for your richest friends here at home. You should never cut the pay of the bravest to fund a cut for the richest in our country. It's the wrong way of carrying out your politics and the wrong way of organising your economy. Now, what about the Liberals, the Liberal Democrats? Now, I like some of them. Right? Don't hold it against me. Right? But there they were at their conference, sheltered from the Glasgow rain, protected from their Tory friends, wandering around the TV studios, showing off their second-rate consciences and demanding some sort of attention and credit. Now, I don't know about you, but it's not good enough to spend just 3 days kind of mildly rebuking the Conservative Party at your conference when you've spent 3 years meekly supporting them in government. And of course, we're going to have a referendum in Scotland shortly, and as for the SNP, their defence policy is based more on faith than in fact. They said Scotland could be better protected if they spent just 7 pence in the pound of the current MOD budget, and Scotland will be safer in that way. But the truth is, they're going to cut further than even the Conservative Party has when it comes to Scotland's defence. And think about all the problems facing the world, and we know that the answer to none of them is Scottish independence. Because the truth is, when it comes to defence, independence is a powerful idea, a really powerful idea of the 19th century, which is ill-suited to the complexity of the world of the 21st century. And there is a different way of doing all of this. That's why Labour will consult charities and legal experts about introducing the first ever Forces and Veterans Bill of Rights, setting out new legal entitlements, in-service education, personalised support from local authorities, and new ways of supporting those who experience life-changing injuries on personal budgets and much else besides. But there's a different way of carrying out that support to be the party of the armed forces. But in that determination, we should be clear, we should be really clear, that determination to be part of the armed forces isn't some sort of contest between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party about who's keenest and then quickest to deploy military force. That's not what it's about. It's about who's best at equipping, educating and training our forces and who's most determined to support their families. And the hope that we don't ever have to place our forces in harm's way, but in the knowledge that that gravest decision of last resort is sometimes unavoidable. And despite the wariness and the weariness that's entirely understandable, that military component of a security strategy is something our country and our party has always understood. whether it's in eulogising those socialists who defied a government at home to go and fight in the Spanish Civil War, whether it's when we stood by alongside an unpopular government here at home who were taking on and defying an Argentinian junta, or whether in the 90s when we stopped a European slaughter in the Balkans. Now, if we are going to retain that commitment to be prepared to intervene, we have to learn the lessons of our recent past. And that means acknowledging that situations such as Afghanistan, those long-term mass deployments, are a signal and an example of international failure. Because we need intervention after a sense of proper prevention. And that's a way in which we should organise it, a way in which we invest to ensure that those weak states don't become failing states, which then would necessitate that sense of intervention. And you know, our power in the future will be driven by the sense of partnerships that we can create. And that's why Labour's defence policy will be based upon a new multilateralism, regional coalitions underpinned by stability in the defence budget, defence, diplomacy, development, each mutually reinforcing, all empowered by a total rejection of isolationism, and each by a welcome and strengthened by a welcome embrace of internationalism. That's why, on this issue of military deployment and how it must always remain our last resort, we were right when it came to Syria, to set stringent tests about the regional impact, about a UN process, and upon evidence before we voted on military action. And I want to finish with just one last thought, which is that our party and our movement has never turned its back on our international responsibilities. And while some prominent people will label us a small island that no one pays any attention to any longer, the truth is we remain a big nation with our global reach. And under Ed's leadership, we will continue to stand for that tradition, of standing up for what we believe at home, projecting power and influence abroad, and always honouring the service and sacrifice of our armed forces, regardless where they serve. Thank you, Conference.